Oodalali and welcome. My name is DJ, aka Ferda Fangorn, and I am back today to begin a two-part mini-series on approaching deck building for first-time deck builders, players who are new to TCGs and Disney Lorcana is the first one they jumped into, and just general tips for the very basics of deck building. This first video will be a quick overview of a little bit of tips and things to look for. I'll go into the Dreamborn site a little bit and show in there what that looks like. It's a phenomenal resource. We'll get into that as we move further into the video. We're going to talk about the rules when constructing a deck that you have to follow and things like that. And in the second video, I will actually go through the process of what I'd like to do when I first started playing and had maybe less cards available, a smaller card pool, if you will, to build from, and kind of show you my approach. Now, to start this video, I'm going to start with talking to you like this, and then we're going to jump into a little bit of a screen share type video where I'm going to show you the Dreamborn.ink website and how that comes into play and how useful that can be. So to begin, we're going to talk about the rules that are required when you're putting together your Disney Lorcana deck. Now, there's only three real rules for what is allowed to be your deck, and the rules to them. A deck must contain at least 60 cards, no less than that. You can have as many as you want as long as you can shuffle within a reasonable amount of time. My biggest piece of advice regarding that is stick to 60 when you're first starting out. It just really helps. Second, you can't have more than two different ink colors in your deck, meaning your deck can only consist of two of the six various inks. This new set coming out in a couple weeks, in a week and a half or so, has new cards that are dual ink, which features two inks on the same card. They must go into a deck made up of those two dual inks. Finally, you cannot have more than four copies of any specific card in the deck unless that card happens to say otherwise. We have the Dalmatian Puppy card, and I want to say Microbots item in the game right now that lets you put in any number of them that you want. I think the puppies might cap out at 99 to stay on theme, which is pretty awesome. And then there's a new card coming out in this next set for Acacia Island. That is the Glass Slipper. That actually only limits you to two. It's the first card we've seen that you are not allowed to run at a four of. But those are the only three rules when it comes to starting out and making a deck. As long as you follow those rules, your deck is technically legal. Now, when it comes to those four specific cards, you can only have four of a specific card. There are obviously characters that have many different versions of themselves. You can have up to four copies of a single version. For example, if you had a Ruby deck, you could run four copies of this Mickey Mouse um, Pirate Captain, and you can run four copies of Mickey Brave Little Tailor and have no issues. You can't run more than four of those, but you can run as many different versions of Mickey Mouse as you want, as long as you don't go over four copies of that version. Now, as far as tips, basic tips for beginning deck building and venturing into the world of it, it's a very vast world. There's a whole lot of intricacies. Every single deck is totally different. None of them follow the same rules, but for our purposes, and my main goal here is to just help you with understanding the foundation of a deck. So my first piece of advice is like I said before in this video, to keep your deck as close to 60 as possible. It just makes the deck more consistent and it gives you a better chance to see if it can do what you are hoping it will do. To improve that consistency, my second tip is to include as many four ofs as possible, meaning that try to run four copies of as many cards as you can. Some cards are better suited as one or two ofs, and that's fine. But you really want to kind of up your consistency as much as possible, especially when you're first starting out. It just makes your life a little bit easier. It makes it easier for you to see where your deck might be a little weak, might need improvement in. Um, Third, I would say limit your uninkables to a maximum of 10, at least for when you first start building decks. Personally, I tend to hard cap at 15 unless I have a specific build that can allow me to go over that. But at the very beginning, when I first started building decks, I made myself stay at 10. Just it helps gives you more flexibility. Like I said, it gives you a more guaranteed chance to be able to ink on curve and just to add your inkwell every turn and still play something. It lowers your chances of bricking, which means you're being stuck without being able to play anything because, say, everything in your hand is uninkable and you don't have enough ink to play anything. You just lose out on that turn, and that's usually pretty devastating to the game. Um, in general, my next tip would be to make the overwhelming bulk of your deck characters. It's just really good to have them on board. It just makes your deck a little bit easier to kind of figure out where you want to go. Obviously, there are going to be deck types that want to lean a little bit away from characters, but I personally, when I first started, tried to run anywhere from 45 to 50 characters at least in a deck. It just makes things a little bit easier. Having a character on board just makes your life a little bit easier. It's just a good rule of thumb, in my opinion, to start. The next thing you want to do is make sure you include cards that allow you to draw. You want to at least have a few different ways to draw cards, put cards in your hand, or at least cards that replace themselves. And by that I mean when you play it, you get to draw a card, basically refilling its spot it left in your hand. You just need to make sure you find a way to maintain some kind of hand size. It just makes playing the game much easier, gives you more options on your turn and how to answer your opponent as the game gets going. Also, on top of that, you want to make sure you have a couple ways to remove characters from your opponent's board without necessarily challenging, be it some kind of action that banishes something, maybe even something that makes one of your weak characters strong, so you can trade up, so to say, with like a one cost character into a three or four cost character, and so on. You just need to find a way to also kind of bring balance back if you start to lose the board a little bit. And then finally, you want to pay attention to your curve. Curve is kind of a complicated thing. It's going to be different in every single deck. But the general rule of thumb is it's your ability to utilize all the resources you have available, and especially in the early and mid game, you really want to be playing things on turn one that cost 1 ink, turn two that cost 2 ink, turn three costs 3 ink, and so on. Once you get to about 5 or 6 ink, 5 or 6 turns, you can kind of start deviating from that and start playing into more strategy. Again, every single deck is totally different, so this isn't always going to be the case. But for us and what we want to accomplish as beginning deck builders is just consistently playing things on a power curve, just to kind of get a feel for it, kind of see where you falter, where you did right as well in your deck building. Um, for as far as specific decks, I'm going to go into Dreamborn and show you a deck that I put together just for this video, and I'm going to walk through what it looks like and what I was trying to do. Okay, so here we are on Dreamborn.ink. It is the best resource, in my opinion, by a large margin for deck building. Even for collection keeping, it's a great way to track your collection and just see where you're at on things. But for our purposes in this video, we're focusing on the very, very beginning of deck building. So I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of this website and what it looks like and what it means. Up top here, you can see the two inks that we use for our deck, Emerald and Ruby together. Next to it is the deck name. I just named it Deck Building 101. I usually get a lot more creative with my deck names, but this was just something I threw together quickly to kind of show the different points I am talking about. Below that name of the deck, you can see that number 60. That number there represents how many cards are actually in the deck. The number next to it is the number of uninkables we have in the deck, which is sitting currently at 8, which is a nice, low, beginner-friendly number of uninkables. Allows for some flexibility. The heart is just how many people like the deck, and the other one's how many people have looked at it. Nobody's going to look at this deck. It is what it is. People usually are on the site if they're looking for decks, are looking for the highly competitive decks, and this is clearly not one, sitting at $20 in cost. But you can see here it breaks it down into characters, into actions and songs. If you had items or locations, it would also show those. It breaks it down into cost order. This is just the default showing. If you can go over here and there's a view, you can also look at it this way with cards. You can see the actual cards and how many of each you have in the deck. I prefer the list. It's just a much quicker look. For me, this one just shows them lined up like if you lined up your cards on the table, wanted to show your deck. Then my other favorite thing is to group it by cost as well, and you can quickly get a quick snapshot of how many things you have in each cost range for cards. Um, if you're like me, I enjoy having a hard recipe and or number or measurements to follow whenever I do anything new. As someone who likes to cook, I always cook a recipe verbatim the very first time I do it. Except for garlic, you always add extra garlic. That's just a rule. So like that way you can kind of tweak it from there. So when you're first building decks, I would try to recommend sticking to this kind of recipe rule. I personally like to have 10 to 12 one cost cards, 10 to 12 two cost cards. In here, you can see I've got the 10 one cost, 11 two cost, both within that number range that I just mentioned. And then as for 3 and 4 costs, I like to have between 14 and 16 of each. Again, 14-3, 15-4. These should make up the bulk of your deck and nearly half of your deck, especially when you're first starting building decks, unless it's a very specific type and you already know you like that type. This is something I would definitely recommend because you really want to make sure you're hitting turns 1, 2, 3, and 4 consistently with any kind of deck, especially if you're putting together a deck yourself from scratch. It's just a really good way to make sure your deck has the legs it needs to even just get started in the game. As for 5 cost cards, I usually recommend anywhere from 6 to 8. This one's on the lower end, so this one's got 6 in this deck, and then for 6 cost cards and up, so anything from 6 cost, 7 cost, 8, 9, 10, and so on. I recommend 4 to 6 of those cards. I have 4 in this deck. Even if you're just starting, so maybe keep that down to 2 or 3, and then bump up that 5 or 1 or 2 to make sure you're getting that early game consistency. And then also on Dreamborn, um, you go to this info tab here, and this is the quickest way to see what your curve actually looks like. You can visualize the curve of your deck. As you can see here, the 3 and 4 clearly makes up the bulk of the deck. That is where you kind of see the curve. It's curving up, and then it curves down. That's where it gets its name. This screen will also show you a quick pie chart of your inkable to uninkable ratio, 52 to 8. Again, you will always have that up here at the top under the name of the deck, how many uninkables are in it. It's a very important thing to be aware of when you're building a deck, your uninkables. So just always be conscious of that. And this final pie chart on the right is just card type breakdown, so you can just kind of get a quick view. So here you see the blue, you got 50 of the characters, actions, and then they even have songs broken into their own type. The other pie chart is just the ink. So you got 28 emerald cards, 32 ruby cards. It's not nearly as important, but it's still pretty cool to see. So as you can see, this is a very standard curve. This is the type of curve you should want when you're first building together your decks. Like I said, the aggro control deck curves are going to look a little bit different. So I'm just going to show you real quick what those look like in case you already know that's a playstyle you like. I don't have hard numbers to give you like I did for this deck, but it's still something nice to visualize. Let's see. I build a lot of decks, as you can see. A lot of these are just silly. Gluttonous Goat. Perfect. This is an aggro style deck that I built. It's a very affordable, very budget friendly deck, and it's actually very good. Does well against the meta. Well, it did. We'll see what happens with the new meta. So as you can see here, it's still 60 cards. It's up to 16 unequals because in an aggro deck, your cost curve is usually so low that it doesn't matter. So as you can see here, if you go into the info, you can see the curve spikes up to 3 and then plummets because this deck wants to go fast and wants to keep multiple characters on the board. It wants to finish a game quickly. So you are able to kind of get away with including some extra uninkables. It also has a lot of strong draw power, which also allows me to go up on inkables, but mostly because I top out usually around 5 ink needed at most, and those cards aren't that many that I can kind of get away with sitting at 3 or 4 ink for a couple turns if I have to. And then finally, I don't play a whole lot of control, but I have this really fun deck I built around Donald Duck Pie Slinger. So you can see it's at 13 unequals. Like I said, 15 is usually where I like to be. Where I'm at now at deck building is 15 is my cap. So you can see here, it's a totally different type of build. A lot of items, songs, and actions. Less heavy. It's only half characters. But if you go to info, you can see it kind of stays flat, spikes at 6, and still has a bunch of cards beyond 6. This deck is built for late game. It is built on ramping, which is putting extra cards into your inkwell and having extra resources as fast as possible to play things that cost more before you're supposed to be able to play them. But yeah, that's pretty much what curves will kind of look like. And like I said, Dreamborn.ink is just a phenomenal resource. Create a profile. You don't have to put your collection on it, but it is just one of the best ways to build decks. It has endless decks. So if you go over here, just go to decks in general, and these are all decks that were probably just built moments ago. So as you can see, as you scroll, and it goes on forever. You could look for whatever if you just type you like. Hey, you know what? I want to build an aggro deck. Boom. People that labeled it aggro. There you go. A bunch of aggro decks to look at. So on and so forth. Budget friendly. Anything, almost anything and everything you want. Mid range. Yeah. So definitely create an account on here. It is the best deck building resource available for Lorcana right now. And so to wrap things up here, in conclusion, we just want to keep things simple and consistent as you go into this new era of TCG life for you as a new player. Deck building is extremely complicated and it can be extremely simple depending on how you want to approach things. I personally, it's my favorite part of any trading card game I've ever played is just the deck building. I would spend hours just building and taking apart decks, not even playing them. It's just to me, I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot trickier than it appears to really nail down a very consistent, strong deck. And unfortunately, the only way to really know if your deck is any good, if it's bad, if it turns out to be boring, or if it's a ton of fun is by playing with it. One of the most important things to remember is also you're going to lose a lot. It's just part of the game. You're going to learn more by losing than you will by winning, most likely. It's going to teach you what, maybe your deck is too high on one thing, or maybe the curve is too high or too low. You just run out of gas as the game keeps going. You thought you built a fast deck, turned out to be more mid range control. Um, and you can't let that discourage you. There are plenty of times I've built a deck and I just want to throw it in the trash can after 2 games because it just is terrible. And then it turns out I just need to tweak a couple things, and suddenly it becomes a very functional and fun deck to play with. It is just a game. It's all meant to be fun. So just try to remember that as well as you go into this. And then my last thing I think I want to say in this video is maybe look into what playstyle you want to be. Some people like combos. Some people or things that like require multiple cards to pull off. Some people like a more control style deck, which is basically playing slow. You're slowly building a board and just controlling what your opponent's board looks like for the first little bit, and then as you take control of the deck and hopefully outlast your opponent, you can then go on and win. I personally am a mid-range player. Mid-range I like because you can usually kind of lean into like the control side if a game goes on long. If you play against the aggro deck, you can kind of hopefully have enough to keep up with speed on that, and also enough control in your mid-range to take care of that. Mid-range is probably also kind of like a combo. It's just your curve's going to be a little bit more middle. You want to win turn 6, 7, 8 or so. And then there's aggro, which is very beginner friendly. It just wants to go fast. You want to win the game by turn 5 typically. And it's just all you really want to do is quest, and get it to 20 before your opponent can really start taking any kind of control. Figuring out what you kind of like to do will also help you find decks that you enjoy playing and you want to build a part of. And again, in Dreamborn, that site we were using is a phenomenal resource. There are countless decks of countless varieties of countless types. A lot of people label them with these labels too, so you can kind of go in and see if one of these things fit what you're trying to do. If you're unsure of what your deck is or what it wants to be or which way you should lean it, I'm more than happy to help you. If you want to leave a comment or message me, you can find me on X under the same name. I'm very active over there. I share deck lists over there. You can share your deck list with me, and I can help you. Again, I'm no expert. I just really, really love this game. I really love building decks, and I just really want to help people enjoy the game. And with that said, I am going to wrap up this video. So thank you for stopping by and tuning in. Um, yeah, I'm on X, like I mentioned before, under the same name, Ferda Fangorn, very active over there. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns about the video, anything I may have missed, things you thought I might have gotten wrong, let me know. I welcome any and all feedback. And with that, be love, be you, and God bless.